Hello, let's talk about the ITTO factor. ITTO stands for Inputs, Tools and Techniques and Outputs. If you are preparing for the PMP exam or the CAPM exam, you've probably heard the term ITTO, Inputs, Tools and Techniques and Outputs. Now, why is this important for the PMP or CAPM exam? The reason is this. Throughout almost a decade of training people for the PMP exam, I've discovered that people who are not entirely firm regarding ITTO knowledge often find difficulties on the PMP exam. They may know all the formulas and some of the definitions, but if they have left stones unturned in the world of ITTOs, I've discovered those folks typically have issues on the test. I've seen it time and time again. I've seen students who studied all the Maslow's theories and McGregor's and Herzberg's and did all the network diagrams and did all the earned value management stuff. But when it came to the broader picture of ITTOs, knowing and understanding all of the definitions for ITTOs, they didn't do that. They didn't know the definitions, and consequently, on their first tries on the PMP exam, some of these folks failed the exam. Now, on their second try, what we did was fine-tune their focus. We fine-tuned their focus to the ITTOs, and then they passed the test. They did absolutely nothing different as far as the formulas, which they already knew quite well. But when it came to the ITTOs, we realized that their vision was out of focus. So the ITTO factor is a critical factor if you are preparing for the PMP and CAPM exam. Do yourself a huge favor. Search on the web for the PMP exam specification. First of all, read that document and understand all that's in there as it relates to the exam and the tasks that you need to be able to carry out to be ready for the exam. It's called the PMP examination specification, also known as the PMP content outline. If you do a search for a PDF, you'll find it. Now at the end, I'll give you those links, but for now, I also want you to remember the PMI lexicon of terms. If you haven't read that, do yourself a favor, Google it. You'll find a free version on PMI's website. Read the lexicon. The lexicon has definitions of lots of the inputs, tools, and techniques and outputs that are in the PMBOK. So if you feel the PMBOK is a little bit weighty and you don't feel like opening it, well, download the PDF, the PMI lexicon of terms, read it, understand it, know it. Now, let me give you a little bit of my insights regarding ITTOs and how to study them and how to get them into your head. When you think about a process input, a process input obviously is an input to a process. A process input could also be very difficult to remember, especially if you've only read it once or twice. Studies show that it takes you up to 7 iterations to actually get something firmly into your head. So if you're reading the ITTO through like a drive-by just once, guess what? It's not going to stick. To get these inputs into your head firmly, my suggestion would be to look at examples of these inputs so that when you hear the term, you've got a frame of reference in terms of a picture, a template, a graphic, something to call your attention to what that input really is, instead of just having at the back of your mind project charter, 2 words. If you take a look at a template or tool that is really a project charter, a template. Now let's use the word template so as not to mix it with tool, but in organizations people refer to a lot of these ITTOs, all of them, they bunch them all up and call them tools or templates. But a project charter, for example, is an input to developing a project management plan. If you come across the term project charter, look for project charter, understand why it's an input to the process. And then we also have process outputs. A process input to developing your project charter in the first place, for example, could be the statement of work. The statement of work is an input to the developed project charter process and outcomes, the project charter. In order to really know what these two things mean, what they do for you in project management, my suggestion is to look for templates. Make sure that you really know what these things are in the real world, in the physical. So our book, Project Management Essentials, that's available on www.praizion.com, is different from your typical PMP or CAPM prep book in that it has examples of the core 50 tools, techniques, inputs and outputs. So you'll find an example of a project charter, of a project scope statement, of a WBS, of a WBS dictionary, and so on. My other book, which recently came out, which is a part fiction, part project management book called The Time Machine Project, is on Amazon. In that book, I've got examples of core ITTOs with all the data filled in to give people examples of how these documents look, like a project charter with data or scope statement with data. Take a look at some of these and it will help firm your understanding. Now, we could have, of course, bunches of inputs to a process, and then we get the process output. Several inputs become inputs to a process, and from there we get process outputs. In some cases, only one process output. Now, that process output becomes an input to, say, a process Y. And in addition, process Y also has other inputs that, along with that orange box, the process output from process X, they all become inputs to process Y, and then we get an output from process Y, and the cycle continues. And the PMI, they tell you in the PMBOK guide, except in a terminal process, process outputs should always become inputs to some other process, except you have a terminal process. So as usual, in this process, we have inputs and a process output. Now for your exam, it is key to remember these key, I call them key process outputs. And that's what I'll be talking about for most of this session, how to identify and get these process outputs, which become inputs further down to stick. We have a really great game regarding all this stuff I'm showing you here. It's called PMP Power Cards. If you go on Google Play site and you type in Praizion and you look for the PMP Power Cards game, it's a game for Android only because Apple refused to let that app be published on the iPhone. Wasn't difficult enough or was too easy. Try playing with that app if you've got an Android. I tell you, there's nothing easy about the content there. That will stretch you to the limit when it comes to ITTOs. So go on Google Play, check it out, or go to Praizion.com and look for our logo there, the mascot, the Mad Professor. It's a green background. Click on that and it'll take you to the Google Play site. You'll find that app. Play about with that app. I guarantee you, after 2 days non-stop of playing with that app, it will sort you out. You'll discover that you either know the ITTOs very well or you cannot make the linkages, and it will show you your weak areas. So let's take a look at the initiating process group. In initiating, you remember we have two processes. We have develop project charter and identify stakeholders. Let's take a look at develop project charter. The first input is agreements. Agreements are important. It's important to understand what exactly they mean when they say agreements. So understand that agreements are any type of agreement. Any agreement or document which imply willingness to take action in a particular direction. Could be a contract, a letter of intent, a memorandum of understanding, anything that constitutes some agreement needs to be an input to developing the project charter. The business case is another one. The business case, which makes a case for the project, is also an input. But do you know what these look like? Do you know what a business case looks like? Do you know what type of information you typically have in here? It's important as you study your ITTOs, the statement of work. What exactly is it? What is the difference between a statement of work and a procurement statement of work? And the usual EEFs and OPAs are inputs. Know what these are at a high level, and as you go through all of the processes in planning, you'll understand what they are when you see them as a recurring theme. So all of these are inputs to the develop project charter process. For your exam, I would expect you to know easily agreement, business case, and statement of work. I expect you to know what they look like. I expect you to know the difference between a statement of work and a scope baseline, the difference between a scope baseline and a WBS, the difference between a scope baseline and a project scope statement. You see, to understand with clarity all of these different ITTOs, the output you get is derived by implementing the tools and techniques such as expert judgment and facilitation techniques, and the output is the project charter. So as you go through a process, break it down piece by piece. Don't just whiz through the 47 processes. You need to break them down and say, what are we really doing here? Let's start from ground zero. What are we putting in to this process? And go through them one by one. Understand the mechanics, how it all works. Understand the tools and techniques you are applying and why, and what you're getting out of the process. You have to break it down to this really low level. If you don't, you'll run into problems later on because you don't know where the questions are coming from. If you've not studied all the ITTOs and they come out with some crazy ITTOs that you've not even studied or looked at, well, it's fair game, and they're going to have a free game all over you. They're just going to make the exam so miserable for you that it'll just be a walkover. So don't let that happen to you. Go over each process with a fine-tooth comb. You know, these guys are really tricky. Just because Bob took the exam last week and had nothing from earned value, or had nothing from network diagrams, or perhaps his exam was full of risk, it doesn't mean your exam will be the same way. Take a look at this next process, identify stakeholders. Now, if you've studied the PMBOK, do you recall the inputs to identify stakeholders? Apart from the project charter, what else? See, this is easily a great game to play. You might want to put one of these together yourself and ask yourself, what comes next? What comes in addition to the project charter? What else could be used to identify stakeholders? I mean, at this point, we're initiating. What else do we actually have? Well, you can bank on EEFs and OPAs, can't you? Well, let's take a look. We've got procurement documents, EEFs, and OPAs. Those procurement documents are helpful in that they've got information that might be relevant to stakeholders, stakeholder identification. And if those procurement documents have vendors or contractors or sellers, then that information needs to become an input to identifying your stakeholders. How do you do that? Well, your manager or whoever you report to may have expert judgment that will help you identify stakeholders. He or she might know people that you need to involve in a project. So you need to think about the possible tools and techniques that you can apply to any process. As usual, we've got meetings, which is a new one in the PMBOK Guide 5th edition, and stakeholder analysis. And stakeholder analysis breaks down your stakeholders into categories and does an analysis on their power interest levels, their influence impact levels, and puts that into a power influence or power interest grid. So I'm just trying to sensitize you to the fact that you need to break this stuff down and say, what are we doing? What are we getting? How are we getting it? What do we need? How are we doing it? What are we getting out? Your stakeholder register. Break this stuff down. Now, these two processes I've shown you so far, apart from EEFs and OPAs, pretty much all that we've looked at is very important to remember for the exam. The tools and techniques are important to remember with precision. For example, if someone said stakeholder analysis is a tool and technique used in what? You should know that cold. You should know it cold. If someone says you have a stakeholder register, it's being used on the project, which process does it come from? Now, these are not exam questions by any stretch, but they will help you. This knowledge will help you on the exam questions. Moving into planning, same thing. Develop project management plan. I said earlier, your project charter is an input. What else do you have that you think could be an input? Well, of course, you get tons of outputs from other processes, which become inputs here. You have your regular EEFs and OPAs. So when you boil it all down, know those key, I call them key, or I call them unique ITTOs. So taking a look at this, these are rather unique in that they are very, very specific, and they are not your regular EEFs and OPAs. These are very specific. If you're talking about develop project management plan and you don't know that's an input to it, and you don't know that's an input, you've got a problem. Of course, these are typical on many of the planning processes, but these two are so important. They're key, they're unique. These are also important, I would say, as you study this, look for patterns. Did I just say patterns? Hold on to that thought. These are inputs to develop project management plan. Our key tools and techniques are expert judgment and facilitation techniques. And then our key output is the project management plan. Hold on to the thought of patterns. Plan scope management. Now you see the output, project management plan, is now an input to this. You have your project charter and your usual EEFs and OPAs. Inputs to plan scope management. You've got expert judgment and meetings, it's tools and techniques. You've got your scope management plan. You have to know where your scope management plan comes from, your risk management plan. You know, all the plans, know where they come from. Go to page 78 in the PMBOK Guide 5th edition, know that stuff. We also have our requirements management plan as an output here. Going into collect requirements, your scope management plan, your requirements management plan, EEFs and OPAs are inputs. And you use so many of these tools and techniques, too many to talk about here. But this is where people begin to get lost. You see so many ITTOs, so many tools and techniques, and you don't care to break them down one by one and ask, what is the relevance of this? An interview. What are we doing with it? We're collecting requirements through interviews, through focus groups, through facilitated workshops. Focus groups focus a core subset of the wider team. It's not for everyone. We're trying to get everyone on the same page and try to understand, what do you think should be part of our process here, or part of our requirements here, and so on. If you go through all of these with a fine-tooth comb, asking, what is the difference between a focus group and a facilitated workshop? What are group creativity techniques? What are group decision-making techniques? Questionnaires and surveys. If you go through all of these tools and techniques and look for tangible examples, which there's so many out there. If you go through our course, you'll find many of these. But if you truly understand what all of these tools and techniques are, it will greatly help you. Requirements documentation and requirements traceability matrix are outputs. Not knowing where these come from is unforgivable on the exam. Remember, you don't want the PMI to make you free game. Don't become free game on the PMP exam. You want to hunt the game. You don't want to be the game. Alright, now let's take a look here very quickly. I want to show you a really great tool here for the PMP exam. Now our students use this tool. Talking about patterns, it breaks down the tools, techniques, inputs and outputs into columns. It allows you to do searches and so on. It also allows you to look for commonality. So for example, if I wanted to find all of the places where, say, let's find something here. Project statement of work is an input. It shows me my project statement of work is an input to develop project charter. Okay, let's take a look at something else. So I'm going to clear that. I'm going to look for another one. I want all the places where the project charter is an input. Oh, the project charter is an input to all of these processes over here. Develop project management plan, plan scope management, collect requirements. Wow, so many. Okay. So you have to know this stuff cold. You have to know it cold. You have to look for patterns. You know, one of my students who had failed the exam using a different solution way back when and eventually found my tools out there, she decided she was going to go ahead and take the exam. And this was a Friday. And she wanted to take the exam on a Monday, retake the exam on a Monday, but she hadn't prepared well enough. I knew she hadn't prepared well enough because she hadn't done very well on our quizzes on the learning management system, but she still wanted to go ahead. I realized I needed to prep her for the test properly by ensuring she knew all the ITTOs. So on Monday, I believe it was, the exam was on a Tuesday. On Monday, we went through all of the ITTOs, bit by bit by bit. Went through all of the ITTOs, covered all of the ITTOs in a space of 2 hours. She took the exam on Tuesday, killed the exam, is a PMP, has moved on. She testifies that without that deep dive into all of the ITTOs, there is no way she would have passed that exam. Now, that procedure, that method that I helped her go through to master the ITTOs is encapsulated in our Praizion.com product. If you go to Praizion.com, just be sure to check out the PMP Power Review, which is right over here. If you go to Praizion.com, PMP Exam Power Review is a 5-hour review of all of the ITTOs in a PMBOK guide at a really manic pace. If you've got your exam coming up in the next 1 day, 5 days, 30 days, it's a no-brainer. You need this item. Get on Praizion.com and grab this item. This item will help you cover all the ITTOs within 3.5 hours, and there are 1.5 hours of other videos for you. That's the curriculum right there. Strongly suggest that you get this. It's video for your smartphone or your mobile device. So get that, study, know your ITTOs, and let's succeed on this thing. I want you to kill that exam, put it in a chokehold, teach it a lesson. But the only way you're going to teach it a lesson is by studying deep and hard. And to do that without tools, it's like pulling teeth. Could be quite hard. Again, on our homepage, take a look. You'll find an array of great tools to help you on Praizion.com. Like I said, that's the app page. I will take you to the Google Store, Google Play Store. And there you'll see the 3 different apps we have. But like I said, one of those apps will really kick you. It's PMP Power Cards. That is a mean app when it comes to the ITTOs. When it comes to the tools alone, you want that one. And when it comes to the definitions, you want that. And all affordably priced. So, with that, we've come to the end of ITTO factors. I hope you had fun. I hope this has sensitized you to the fact that you need ITTOs. I forgot to tell you a story about this particular tool here. A student named Ben, who had been hit badly twice on the PMP exam before he came aboard with Praizion Media, had tried to pass the exam without success twice, finally came on board, said he was ready to take the test, and took our mock exam. Now, our mock exam is a really good lie detector test. It tells us if people are truly ready. Ben was not ready. Didn't get very good results on the mock exam, got like a 56. I saw Ben's weakness lay more in the ITTOs when I took a look at his scores and the analysis of his exam. And his mock exam just told me he needed to firm up the ITTOs. So he played around with this page on his tablet. And he played around with it for 4 solid days, trying to understand each output, looking for definitions of each input, tool, and technique and output. And eventually he decided, well, I've done the best I can, I'm ready. He had really firmed up his understanding. He didn't just pass the exam, he got 4 proficients. 4 proficients. I mean, how cool is that? To get 1 proficient is hard enough. To get 4 on the PMP exam, it tells me that he had really done his job. Now, before he got his 4 proficients, I should tell you that when he took the exam twice before, he had below proficients in almost everything. Can you imagine 5 below proficients? To go from 5 below proficients to 4 proficients, it tells you that he did something extraordinary. He got on a program with deliberateness, a program with intentionality. I'll show you the program right here. Program he got on was our PMP Premium Power Pack. Got on this program, studied hard, did what he needed to do, and very importantly, he used that tool I showed you, and he crushed the exam, got his 4 proficients, moved on. If you are struggling with intentionality, with a process to take this exam, come on board. You'll have an array of materials and tools to help you out. But don't forget, the ITTO factor is a critical factor for your PMP exam. Thank you for your audience. All the best. Talk to you soon.